Now we are moving on to the situation around Ukraine. The Kiev regime has not stopped tourism activities against Russian civilians and civilian infrastructure. As we know, for Bandera, not only we, but more and more people understand. There is nothing sacred about states, non-governmental organizations and people. Even during the Easter holiday, known as the Easter holiday for Catholics and Orthodox Christians, they continued to shell residents of Russian regions. From May 3 to 6, residential buildings in Donetsk, Horlivka, and Sherovaty-Avdiivka were targeted due to drone attacks and explosive device detonations. 7 people were injured. On May 5th, in the village of Nikolaevka DR, a family in a car was blown up by a mine at a high altitude, seriously injuring adults, a man and a woman. Fortunately, their child was unharmed. Google for nothing? You're the drone aid source that attacked the parade participants. After that, the Assumption of Nicholas Vasilievsky Monastery miraculously avoided casualties in the Shekinsky district of Belgorod Oblast, and a drone hit the village of Murompave next to the Holy Trinity Church in Berdyansk, Zaporizhia Oblast. A Russian prison service officer has been killed in a car bombing organized by Ukrainian terrorists. Bandera continues to use kamikaze drones to attack unarmed people in Belgorod. There have been 2 such attacks in recent days. On May 3rd, in the village of Voznesenovka, a bus was attacked by a drone. He was transporting employees of a local company, and on May 6th, a passenger was injured near the village of Velska in the Borisovsky district. I was hit by a drone. A car, a passenger car, and 2 minibuses. 7 people were killed, 42 injured and hospitalized. Their 3 younger brothers were policed after the doctor arrived. Police rescuers also arrived. Yu and Wu adopted their usual travel tactics, and they hit the drone again. With regard to civilians, although there has been no international response to the atrocities of the Kiev regime, I would even say otherwise. Although some countries, those with unfriendly regimes, actually encourage the Kiev regime. Russian law enforcement agencies have carefully documented the crimes of Ukrainian neo-Nazis in such activities, and none of the atrocities of the Kiev regime have been ignored. Those involved are being identified and held accountable. Well, I want to talk about it in more detail now. The courts of the Russian Federation continued on the basis of evidence collected by the Russian Commission of Inquiry. Sentence Ukrainian militants who committed serious crimes against civilians in the southern region. A military court sentenced Prahonyuk to 18 years in prison for serving with the Azov tourism organization and participating in hostilities against Russia in LNR. No Ukrainian criminal can get away with it. They will be established and will respond to the strictest of the law. We will tell you regularly about their crimes and the inevitable punishment. We have said a lot, including witnesses to the crimes committed by the Kiev regime during this period. Easter, including monasteries and temples, I would also like to elaborate on this topic. These are not just some point-and-point singles. You know, these demons who are divorced from general policy can act across, so to speak, decide to do this blasphemy. Without such a tone, Zelensky set a tone, and on May 5th he delivered a truly satanic speech to Ukrainians on the occasion of Easter. You just listen, he listens, he agrees to God's point of view from Zelensky's point of view. With a herringbone on his shoulder bearing the Ukrainian flag, what kind of God needs to continue this speech and clarify which gods? In principle, does Zelensky believe it? By the way, this is not idle at all, nor is it sarcastic. The truth is, he also classified himself as different. As far as we know, I don't know whether the service of the denomination or the religious social group has determined where he has not been seen in the temple. And Orthodox and He repeatedly spoke to the Jewish people about his participation in some way. This implies that he is an atheist who is simply tolerant of religious groups. But then he doesn't have to talk about God. If he speaks on it and participates in some activities related to various denominations regularly in some way, then it may be good to decide on them, because otherwise it is just some kind of deception for people in costumes. But on the other hand, I think few people believe him in principle, not what he trusts. But of course, he makes similar statements like this. This is certainly an absolute indicator. Such a false entity. This is another state. Of course, if we take Kiev, Pataya Christianity, Orthodoxy, this is definitely a horrible blasphemy. He may not know it, but he has done it many times. He appeared in Orthodox churches and monasteries and spoke on the topic many times. Apparently, those who advised him on religious issues were not aware of this, because no one believed in his sincerity anymore. Maybe you should turn to a consultant. After all, they called on the game god to talk about which military herringbone he was wearing at the same time. Authorities under Zelensky and Bankova are persecuting the Orthodox Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They spend months and days arresting unwanted priests. They bullied the parishioners at the patient's house. Unfortunately, we have succeeded in this regard. I would like to say a few more words about how Easter was held in Ukraine at that time. Recordings of Zelensky's embroidered shirt in blasphemy were broadcast by all Kiev propaganda resources and shared entirely by Ukrainian social network users. Another video sequence. In these videos, they are separatists of the so-called Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They turned the bright Easter holiday into a continuation of the real Walpurgis night. During Easter services, they chanted Bandera slogans, and their supporters massacred canonical parishioners everywhere. However, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church has not been affected by violence, threats, or influence. For the real pasta, the vast majority of Ukrainians remain loyal to their faith in the church, and their response to the Kiev clique is the long queue for several kilometers. It's the church near the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Well, a few words about the terrible phenomenon in Ukraine, the so-called. This is what the citizens of Ukraine themselves call the mobilization, and the mobilization is taking place there. It is impossible not to mention the next horror of the violent mobilization in Ukraine. The Kiev regime is prepared to report its attempts to Western masters in some way, and to slaughter anyone, healthy or sick. They don't care at all. For Kiev criminals, they just need to extend this fire. This very dance of death, well, maybe to make more money somewhere, to delay its inevitable terrible fate somewhere, to cover up Western corruption schemes somewhere, especially given the predictions. Где-то прикрыть западные коррупционные схемы, особенно учитывая предвыборный период в Соединенных Штатах Америки. This period in the United States of America and the Biden family directly accused Kiev of corruption. We have no doubt that the EU does not care about the fate of Russians, Ukrainians, anyone or anyone else. In fact, Borelli's claim that they live in a beautiful garden and everything else is a wild jungle proves the purpose of this Western elder. The goal of the European Union is to try to maintain a world order system based on the West's political and economic parasitism, of other countries' resources, and the so-called golden billion over the global south and east. I believe most countries in the world have considered it. The EU's unorthodox thinking in assessing the expediency of developing relations with it and in establishing its international and domestic policies in general, including all the above factors and facts, is just such a regular one. The outline emphasizes the urgency of the task of special military operations to demilitarize and demilitarize Ukraine and eliminate threats from its territory. As the Russian leader has said, all of these will be completed. And we often receive many questions related to the existence of the so-called Peacemaker website and the inclusion of journalists and public figures in its database. Let me remind you that this is an extremist internet online resource. I would also like to recall that the rights of human structures and international organizations operating on United States servers have been repeatedly drawn attention. And the resource modeled after the Kiev regime's abominable internet that publishes personal data of public figures, publicists, and journalists. By the way, there are even children now. Why are these data published there? Well, how is this a plan to destroy the above-mentioned people? Once this or that journalist, a journalist for a public figure, has been killed, a terrorist attack has taken place, or directly some kind of contract murder, there is a mark that the order has been fulfilled. In fact, the website was created to prepare for terrorist acts. It is an online file of opponents of the criminal Kiev regime, which is subject to the views of Bankova, Zelensky, and American sponsors. All this horrible crime of physical destruction. As I said, after the murder, on the advice of a peacekeeper, the photos of the victims of the shooting list showed signs of elimination. On May 6th, a year ago, saboteurs of the Kiev regime attempted to assassinate journalist and public figure Zakhar Prilepin. As a result, his driver, his friend, comrade in arms, and LPR veteran Alexander Shubin were killed. Zakhar Prilepin was seriously injured. He recalled that they were both in the Peacemaker database. A list of people appeared on the writer's information website as early as 2014. Direct quote, "How is this recorded as a threat to Ukraine's national security? He was included in the 18-year-old group, so his life has been under constant threat. And the hunt for dissidents who are not popular with the Kiev authorities is purposeful." On April 19th, Izvestia war correspondent Semyon Eremin was killed in a targeted drone attack by Ukrainian armed forces. His data was also posted on this very travel website, and the collective West deliberately kept silent for many years. Multilateral human rights institutions. The mechanism of the situation around peacekeepers and other crimes of Kiev payment is clear evidence of hypocrisy. Destroy any standards? Those who call themselves so-called democracies. But of course it all applies. Understand the falsehood of the Western assumption of protecting journalists' rights. Yes, in fact, everything they have to do with human rights.